Welcome to Inside Missions, a production of Maranatha Volunteers International, offering an in-depth look at the people, the cultures, and the countries where Maranatha is working. I'm Dustin Comm, and I'm joined today by Karen Godfrey. Karen is one of the first people hired by Maranatha back in the, what year was it?
1989.
1989, and she's had decades of experience since then in working with volunteers. Karen, welcome to Inside Mission.
Thank you very much.
So I want to talk to you about how you've helped kind of curate Maranatha's volunteer experience over the years, all the groups that you've led. But first off, what were you initially hired for Maranatha?
So I answered an ad in the school paper out of Andrews because I was living in Berrien Springs at the time. And they put an ad in there for somebody who speaks Spanish and who knows accounting. And I'm like, well, I don't know either one of those. But my friend said, you should still contact them. So I went in for an interview the next day and got the job.
Were you the first person hired?
No.
Oh, okay.
So at this point, Maranatha was 20 years old.
Okay.
Yes. And Don at that point had been there for 6 years.
Our president,
Don Noble. And so I started just literally about 2 weeks after that. I had to give notice at my other job. And the thing is I really at that time didn't know much about Maranatha, but I started just doing bookkeeping for a few months. And that really was not my forte. It was not what I was trained to do. And so that wasn't going to be ultimately what I stayed doing.
When you first got involved with volunteers and going on these trips, what were our mission trips like back then for volunteers?
Okay, so like I said, I started in '89, and it was January, and my very first Maranatha project was exactly a year later, January of '90. And I went with another, I just joined another group, and the location was in South Mexico, in Chiapas, very, very close to the border of Guatemala. I think as a crow flies, we were maybe like a mile or less in it from Guatemala. And it was incredibly hot, so hot. I ended up with heat stroke, and the cook actually had a little accident while we were there. And so there were all kinds of these things that happened, but it was a really, really great experience for me to really understand what Maranatha was all about, just to get in there and experience the service and doing it internationally and all of that. And that was just really, it was a good way for me to get my feet wet.
If you don't mind me interjecting, when people go on their first Maranatha mission trip, a lot of times there's a very deep experience that they have. They're really moved in some way. Was there any moment like that for you, or were you kind of in leadership mode and not able to really take it all in at that point?
So I wasn't in leadership mode at that point. I was truly a participant. And I think anytime you go from Maranatha, you're kind of a representative of the office. And so they would have questions and things. But it's certainly not like it is today, where I was expected to do much of anything, you know? So the experience was a really good one. I would say it was a bit clouded by the heat stroke because it was so hot. But in general, it was a fabulous experience, and I was able to use some of the Spanish I had learned in high school, and so and we bonded really, really well as a group. And so which we know is a really big part of Maranatha, is the fellowship that happens on these trips.
Did you feel like, I don't know if I want to go on one of these trips again, I'm going to get, hurt worse, or was it like, no, I actually really like this, despite the not feeling well?
I didn't say I didn't want to go again. I was still gung-ho.
Yeah.
So, you get over those things, and honestly, you kind of forget about them after time, how miserable you were at the moment.
That is true. Yes. You can kind of, being a young parent or, things like that, you kind of forget how sleepless your experience was at that time. So for volunteers in the early 90s, what was a typical mission trip like as far as, their accommodations, the work, just the entire experience?
So most of the time, well, and if I just was to back up a little bit and just talk about mid to late 80s, there started to be a pretty big surge of groups of young people going on Maranatha trips. And
had it been mostly families before that? Or
in the 70s, there were mostly smaller groups where people would learn about something, and they'd get excited about it, they'd call and invite their friends, and then they would go. Or in the case of Yellowknife, there were a lot of people that had airplanes, and word went out through the North American Division, and people just came. So it was a little bit different focus at that time. It doesn't mean that Maranatha or that young people didn't go during the 70s, but it was more intentional, I think, in the 80s, and we even had somebody in the late 80s that was coordinating all of that for Maranatha. And a lot of times the group leaders, of course, are wanting to make this as inexpensive as possible for the young people. So there was a lot of driving into Mexico. There was a lot of sleeping in on floors, and very, very roughing it. Just that environment was there, and it was all it actually came into the 90s that way. And generally, you're sleeping on a dorm bed or you're sleeping on a floor. Couples would hang sheets in between where they were, sleeping in one big room, and you just get creative. And for the most part, I think people loved that experience despite, it's.
I was going to say, there's something about suffering together that pulls people together.
Exactly.
It ingrains that time in your mind. It is sort of a stereotype, though, that you have to suffer and be in those conditions to serve on a mission trip.
And what was interesting is it probably was 1997, someone said, why do you have to suffer to be of service? And I'm like, yeah, maybe you don't. Several of us chatted about that, and it was very, very interesting because right at that time we were planning a trip to Irian Jaya, and that is in Indonesia. That's actually, it shares the island of Papua New Guinea. So Irian Jaya was on the western part of the island and Papua New Guinea on the eastern part of the island. And so Irian was part of Indonesia. And to get there, there were a couple of ways at that point. One of the ways to get there was to come from Los Angeles on Garuda Airways. You would go from Los Angeles to Hawaii to the island of Biak, which is in Irian Jaya, and then ultimately to Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia. Well, Garuda put money into a beautiful, beautiful hotel and a resort right there on the island of Biak. We were getting ready to build a church on the island of Biak. So we went and talked to the hotel, got an incredible rate because they needed the business. And that was the first project that we had that really was intentional about having a bed to lie down in, having a hot water in the rooms for showers, having a lovely kitchen, all those things. It was, we said, okay, we're gonna do this. We're gonna try it and see what happens. Well, over the years, I saw people starting to come on trips after that were like, okay, I don't need to rough it, so maybe I'll go. And after they went, they realized that Maranatha was going to take care of them, regardless if it was a 5-star hotel or a 1-star location. You know what I mean? It was like Maranatha was going to take care of you. And so people then didn't feel like they had to have the really nice place. They would go anywhere, knowing that Maranatha had the details.
Yeah. What did that do for the volunteer experience, when you're leading one of these projects and everyone is well rested? Maybe, I don't know what the effects were, but
in my opinion, your experience is not talking about all of the negative things that happened, like I didn't have hot water. I didn't have this. I got sick. All of these things. The focus wasn't so much on that anymore. It was more about the experience that you had on the project, the people that you met, the either from the group or outside of the group. It became more about that. And for so many years, you may have heard this as you were growing up, people giving reports at church, like always the bus would break down. I mean, inevitably that was part of the report. And Maranatha kind of got to the place where, why don't we try to have a different message coming from the volunteer experience? And I think that just kind of started to happen. And it wasn't just by where they stayed. It didn't just happen because it was a nice place. It happened because Maranatha started putting people in each country that were there specifically to enhance the volunteer experience. Take care of the details. Make sure that when they got there, the place was, it was confirmed that that's truly where they were going to stay, that, some of the groceries had been purchased beforehand, they had pots and pans, all of those things that sometimes someone has to go several days early to do, or go down there several times to make sure it's ready. We just tried to make it easier for people to go, and so their volunteer experience would be better.
Was that a turning point of any kind or a milestone that you could point to and say, well, we were able to see more families, more different kinds of people that wanted to come on these trips? Did our volunteer numbers, grow in any way because of that? Or,
I think it was a turning point in that there were certain people that beforehand would not have gone, mm-hmm. and then said, oh, I think I can do this. And so we had people who were used to traveling. Their travel would be to a resort, which is fine, enjoy that. But then people would come and say, you know what? This was so much more fulfilling, than what I did when I went here and just sat by the pool all week, you know? And yes, people need to relax. We get that. It's, but I just think that that's when we started getting a broader range of volunteers going. Yeah.
Well, Maranatha still has a high school mission trip called Ultimate Workout, where everyone is usually sleeping in some pretty rustic conditions. So we still have some of that, but most of our projects now, you're going to have, clean place to sleep and eat good food provided by a Maranatha, cook. And it's a different experience than it was back when you first started. When you were leading some of those projects in the early 90s, what was the spiritual experience like for our volunteers? And has that changed at all?
So I do think it's changed for the better. Part of when we started looking at the overall volunteer experience, we started identifying, okay, let's take a little bit off the project coordinator and divide up some of the responsibilities. Let's have somebody taking care of the cooking, which had been there for a long time.
And our project coordinators are volunteers normally
Yes.
on our projects, yeah.
And sometimes staff, but the majority of the time they're volunteers. And then besides a cook, you would have a construction superintendent. There were times in the early days where the project coordinator and the construction superintendent were one and the same. And so that's so much for any type of person. It's just a lot, because you're having to make sure everything is okay at the site where you're staying, plus you're having to make sure everything is okay at the job site. Then we also suggested that teams do have a team medic and a spiritual coordinator. Having somebody that is interacting with the volunteers and identifying the stories just by their interactions of things that people would love to hear that are part of the group. So for instance, you're visiting with a young person and you hear their story and say, hey, would you be willing to share that at worship tonight? And it really does make the experience much more meaningful when people are willing to share about themselves. Yes, you can have somebody come that is doing all the mornings, all the evening worships, and usually they're very, very good. But when you have a volunteer that gets up there, talks about their experience, there's something that it does for them, but also for the people that are listening, because they're going, oh, you know what? I've had that experience too. I should go and talk to this person. And what's been interesting to me is that as a project coordinator, many times I don't have the time to be out at the job site or someplace interacting enough with the volunteers to hear about their experiences and putting them, up front in front of other people. And when I have had somebody doing that, I just think that it's made the experience much richer for everybody. Yeah. So,
have you found that volunteers that are able to share their experience process it in a different way? I know when I'm out sometimes with a volunteer group and we're doing interviews for our TV show, Maranatha Mission Stories, it's almost like they haven't been able to process what they've been experiencing until they actually verbalize it.
Yes. And sometimes it is so hard to verbalize. There's certain places in the world that are so hard to put into words. India was that for me. I kept trying to recruit people to come, this was back in the late 90s, and I was so impacted by India. I'm like, we've got to get people here. People have to experience this. But yet to encourage them to come, there were no words. I just was at a loss for words. And one time a volunteer said to me, "You are right, Karen, there are no words." And you do the best you can. And even to this day, I still have trouble putting into words some of what my experience is on different things. But yes, it's, I think it's good for all of us to be challenged on how to describe something, because then it becomes, even when you hear yourself say it, it actually becomes even more ingrained in you. So,
the cultivation of this experience, I think, is something that, probably developed over time, added detail here, added detail there over the years. And you look back and now we have some people that have volunteered 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, more than that times with Maranatha. Why do you think those people keep returning?
So that's really a funny question, because just this last month, I had a group of 46 people in the Dominican Republic. And somebody, when we had our introduction time, like everybody's introducing themselves, somebody said, after coming, I got addicted. And so then others piped in and said, yes, I got addicted, and everybody's just kind of, and then when people ask me about why I'm still here after 35 years, I'm addicted, it would at this point be very, very hard for me to leave this and find anything else that is as fulfilling as what I do here at Maranatha. But at the very end of the Dominican Republic, a first timer got up and said, I came because my wife told me I needed to come. And it happened to be his birthday, that day that he stood up. And I think it was probably kind of a birthday present, for him, even though he wasn't really sure that he wanted to come. And at the end, he said, I'm addicted. And I think there's several reasons for that. Number one, I think the fellowship among other volunteers is something that as humans we crave, and the busier we get, the more we don't get it, in our own homes, in our own churches. And that is so crucial. Plus, an opportunity to do service with other people.
And like-minded people in a lot of ways. If you're giving up all your time and, money to be able to go to this other country and serve, like you have a connection built in automatically.
Exactly. And I have seen people over the years, professionals that have become agnostics, who go on these trips and they start asking themselves, okay, why don't I believe in God anymore? What happened, in this transition? And when they start looking at it and identifying that, they can't really put their finger on it. And there's no real reason except maybe somebody upset them. And I've seen a lot of people just start coming back and saying, and having a relationship with God, which ultimately, we're building people here. It's ultimately what this is all about.
Well, and some of these responses that you get from people who have come and served on a project with you, the experience they have, the addiction that they
Yes.
are supporting in serving is something that anytime you serve, you're going to be impacted. I think that Maranatha's experience for the volunteer, curated over time, has really led to a great experience that people enjoy and want to do over and over again. I'm curious, in the early years for you, what kind of, were you guys constantly analyzing, hey, what can we do better? What is something, we should never do that again? How intentional was that process in the beginning as you were early on in your career?
We actually did have a pretty extensive evaluation process. And it was in writing. Now it's all online, but we would take these evaluations, and at the last meal that we would have together, we'd pass them out. And before they could eat, they had to fill out this form. And we did learn things. And we actually had leadership at the time who were very, very intentional about making this experience about our mission statement. Building people through the construction of urgently needed buildings. And are we doing that? And I really felt like that by getting the feedback from the volunteers and continuing to evaluate what we were doing was helping us accomplish that. So.
You are our VP of Advancement. You're Vice President of Advancement, but you continue to go and lead projects. Why do you do that?
I'm addicted.
You are addicted. You already talked about that.
So actually, I continue to do it, number one, because I enjoy doing it. And I think, I suppose I could just stop right there, but at the same time, there's a certain number of people that I have become acquainted with over the years that I enjoy going with on trips, but also that I've developed relationships with. And I think that in this business, relationships are very, very important. And in fact, there's people that say, I always tend to lead ones that are at hotels. And so there's people that say that I can't rough it, which is not true. It just so happens that the projects that I lead generally are at places that are, have nice accommodations. But I also do it because it encourages me in what I'm doing on a daily basis here. And it's important in the area of advancement for me to be out there making connections with our donors, with our volunteers. And so that helps keep me in touch, really, with who's going and what we're doing.
What is a comment that you've received from volunteers that really gives you a lot of joy that they have had a certain kind of experience?
That's a really good question. As I mentioned earlier, just to hear somebody say, I really had to stop and think about why it is that I didn't want God in my life anymore, or I had stopped going to church, or whatever the case may be. Just to have an experience and to hear them articulate that they thought differently about what they had before and made changes in their lives. I mean, to me, ultimately, that is what we're about.
That's one of the things I love about Maranatha is that anybody can come on any trip and you can make a difference. No matter if you're Seventh-day Adventist, Christian, another faith, you are able to make a difference.
That's right.
Absolutely. Here's a question that might be hard to answer because I'm sure you could pick from a lot of different people here, but is there a particular person that you've met over the years, whether it's a volunteer or someone that it was a local and a place that we were serving at, who has really left a lasting impression on you?
So I think that I'll do one that is maybe career based, and then another that is maybe the first one professional, and then the second one more in lines with the volunteer work that I do. But I think that the president of Maranatha, since I've worked with him for 35 years, has probably made a greater impact on me professionally than anybody else. I have worked with a lot of other people over the years, but nobody as long as Don. And I just feel very blessed that I've been able to have somebody like him in my career to actually just kind of help and guide me. It was, there's been many situations where I have said, okay, help me out on this one. What would you do in this situation? And his experience just has been really, really valuable, and he's willing to share it. And I'm very, very thankful for that. It's hard for me to pinpoint one person that I've interacted with in projects or whatever, but I would say there's probably people in every decade almost, that have had an impact on me. There was one person named Carol Rushhold who in the early 90s, he and Arlene came on their first trip, and then they were addicted and they kept coming back, and they became co-leaders with me. Then they also took groups by themselves, and they were very, very influential people in my life, almost like a second set of parents. And in fact, there were a lot of people out of Grand Junction. For some reason, the Grand Junction just had a lot of people that were very influential to a lot of us here at Maranatha. But, for right now, I would say the two of them.
I want to go back to, you talked about leading a project recently in the Dominican Republic, and you've also been talking about the early 90s. And so I have to ask, when you're talking about the development of Maranatha's volunteer experience, we went from doing several projects every year to doing a lot of projects in 1 year in one place, and that was in Santo Domingo in 1992. What was that experience like for you, coordinating volunteers at that point, correct?
Yes.
You were going from maybe coordinating 100 or 200 every year, I don't know what numbers we were at back then, to then this huge project that had 25 different sites, and what was it? 1,200 volunteers.
1,200 volunteers.
Yeah, what was that like?
Oh, it was absolutely an incredible experience. And for those of us that were there, we still talk about it to these days, and to this day. It's, first of all, I think that our projects had generally had anywhere from 35 to 55 or 60 people on average. I mean, there were some projects in Europe that had more. Yellowknife had more. But when Maranatha stepped out in faith, and truly it was a faith venture, because up until that point, Maranatha had never done anything like that. When we decided to do this, and we put this project out to the membership in August of 1991. And between August of 91 and the middle of January, we recruited 1,200 volunteers.
Wow.
I mean, it was absolutely incredible.
Was there help promoting that through the church or?
Yes, in fact, I think
that's a lot of people in a very short amount of time.
And somehow the word spread. So we had youth groups that were a part of that. We had individuals that were part of that. I think we had ads in the Review, if I'm not mistaken. But then our magazine went out, and word spread. It was just for perspective. Our participation fee was $10 a day per person, and we tried to make it as easy as possible. Come in on a Tuesday, come in on Tuesday, Wednesday, leave on a Tuesday or Wednesday. So somebody could choose, just based on whatever week or whatever they wanted to come. So over a 10-week period of time, we just had people on those Tuesdays and Wednesdays just coming and going. And we had the perfect location for housing for this kind of thing. And I just think that it was a God thing because of how everything came together just so beautifully. We also had, I think, the right people to lead it. So the person who was leading the volunteer experience was Jessica at the time. And I learned so much from Jessica. At that point, I was I was like 27 or 28. So I was still learning details. But after that, I just sort of felt like I can do anything, because we had experienced so much. And the very next year, we had 150 people in Chile, so...
On one project?
On one project, yeah. So it kind of launched us into larger volunteer experiences. And while those are great, they also come with unique challenges of getting the volunteers to know each other, because the more people you get, the harder it is to get to know everybody. So you try to find ways of interacting that create those bonds, between people. But the Santo Domingo experience, just going back actually several times in the last couple of years, has made me remember a lot of the things, that we used to do. But coordinating the buses, coordinating the food and the pews, and making sure that there was work for everybody. We would stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning just identifying which crews were going to go to different churches, so that when they got up in the morning and they had their breakfast and had their worship, they walked out to the bus and they knew exactly which one to go on, because we would post at nighttime on a bulletin board, this is where you go. So they would say, okay, my bus is going to be this bus, and they'd go and load the bus. But I'm telling you, it was about as smooth as you could be at that point in time. Our computers, we were typing faster than our computers were able to take it, and they would beep at us, like you hear every now and then when you're doing something wrong. We go beep beep, So it was just a surreal experience, honestly.
What did you learn about yourself in some of these moments, whether it's Santo Domingo 92 or just a lot of the projects that you've led throughout the 90s and till today? Like what have you learned about yourself, or maybe grown? How have you grown as a person through leading these projects?
So I would have to say, number one, I've grown spiritually, no question about it. I feel like that God has given me a confidence to stand up in front of people and lead them. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes there's bickering, and you have to figure out the right way to handle it. So there's a lot of things that you don't even realize that you're picking up. But there have been some situations over the years where I have realized that if we hadn't taken action at that particular time, we could have had other outcomes, and that were pretty severe, like somebody not getting on an airplane in time enough to make it to the hospital in Hawaii to get treatment. Those kinds of things. And when I look back at that, there was no question in my mind that God sent the doctor to me at the time he did on Tuesday morning in the Marshall Islands. No question, because the plane left 50 minutes later. Otherwise, we would have had to wait until the next night, and that would have been too late. And so situations like that have created just awe, honestly, because thank you, Lord, for allowing me to be part of that, and for using me to help further your work.
When you talk about yourself growing spiritually, what are some of the ways that we try to nurture the spiritual experience of volunteers on a project?
I mentioned earlier about having a spiritual coordinator on the trip, and sometimes those people are pastors. Sometimes they are people who are pastor-like, Sometimes it's listening to somebody and connecting them with another person on the trip that has had a similar experience or that can communicate with them about what's going on in their lives. And one thing that is nice is that as nice as a church community is, sometimes people are labeled after a period of time when you are in a church community, like, oh, so-and-so, they just know so much about your life, and when you come out and you go somewhere where nobody really knows you, you almost get a new lease on life. And I've seen people just come out of a shell and just realize, hey, I can do this. And maybe the label that they had someplace else, whether it was at school or wherever, they kind of shed it, Seen that in the young people that come on Ultimate Workout, seen it in adults too. But I think that's part of the experience of getting people to embrace a different spiritual walk.
Yeah, and especially for youth, it could be for anybody though, really identifying like, this is the way I want to live. Mm-hmm. This is the relationship I want to have with God, with other people. How do you connect the experience people are having, the actual work they're doing on a mission trip to God and their relationship to God?
That's a good question. I think so. I think probably Steve Case does that the best. He's got cards that he's helped develop. We actually have them here at the office, but he helped develop them, like
Maranatha metaphors.
Yes, Maranatha metaphors. And while I don't use those as much, I think that helping them understand how this is going to be used to impact the community makes a really big difference. When we're there on a trip, we do our very best to try and connect them with what is the greater picture of what's happening in this area. And on a recent trip, I said, I understand that not all of you are Seventh-day Adventists, and you don't have to be, obviously. But the reason that we're making this correlation is so that you can understand the bigger picture of why Maranatha is actually doing this project. Because when we're finished, we will hand it over to the church to operate. And I think it's important, regardless of your background, to understand how this building is going to be used to impact people for eternity. And so I would say on the trips I lead, that's generally how we try to do it.
Yeah.
So
how has being a part of Maranatha's mission impacted you over all these years?
So I had traveled up until 1997 or so. I had traveled to several countries, mostly in Central America, but by that time I had already been to Indonesia. I think that was the only place really in Asia that I had spent any time. And then in I think it was May of 1998, a few of us went to India at the request of Ron Watts, went to India, to Bangladesh, and to Nepal.
Was he the division president?
He was Ron Watts was the division president at that time, and he had asked Maranatha to come and build 10,000 churches. So we were going there to look at what the needs were. And I was not prepared emotionally for what I would see there. And I think that all of us have questions in our lives about, okay, what is my relationship with God, but also how does he relate to me on a daily basis? And what about in North America? I think sometimes it's really easy for us to ignore the presence of good and evil, how different they are. I think sometimes we just try to almost like poo-poo that. And there was such a visual difference to me in India that I came away realizing that this is very, very real. The difference between good and evil and the supernatural forces at work here that we may not always see when we're in North America. But it became very real to me, and I realized, okay, I can no longer try to deny that this exists, and that was, and I think I'll go out on a limb and say here that I realized at that point that was very new age. At that point, to think that there were not these supernatural powers that were at war with each other, like the Great Controversy, and so that was kind of the beginning of a road for me. That was a great road, but it kind of knocked me to my knees. Just the experience of going there. Seeing that for myself. And I think that's why I came back and did my level best to encourage other people to go to India. And then we had India 2000, which was a phenomenal experience with people of all ages. We meant it to be for young adults, but young adults or young at heart is the way we advertised it. And we had like 176 people that came to India 2000 from 18 or 19 different countries. I'm forgetting some of the details of it, but it was an incredible experience, and one that I still talk with people about who participated on it. But that was a very important part of my spiritual journey, and it's just continued to get better through the years as a result of my involvement here.
Couple more questions for you here. You've talked about a couple of, I guess you could call them watershed, projects that Maranatha's had over the years. If you take those out, what project would you say is your most memorable or most enjoyable project that you've been, or most impactful?
My very first Africa project was in Livingstone, Zambia. And that was the beginning of years of working on that continent. And I have found Africa to be an incredible experience visually, emotionally, spiritually, and I love going to Africa, but my first one was Zambia. I was blown away at how the people sing. And just one of the things that my sister and I both commented on after being there, I'd never been to a place where everybody was begging for a Bible. We take a Bible so for granted. And even to this day, when we go out to different villages, people are saying, we want a Bible. And a lot of volunteers have stepped to the plate over the years and provided money, brought Bibles in their suitcases and different things like that. But we had our very first project in Livingstone, Zambia was 180. And I don't know if we should have said no at 100.
Is that the largest? Is that the largest one you've ever led? A single project?
Single projects, yeah, I think that's probably the largest. The other one that came close was in Venezuela when we were there for 4 weeks period of time. I think we had 160 in 1 week during that time. But I look back and I say to myself, should I have capped that instead of it being so many people? But we didn't know that 3 years later we'd go back and have another experience in Livingstone. You just don't know that. And it was a really, really great experience for people. And, of course it was a draw because it was Victoria Falls. That's a huge draw. But whatever brings you there, when you get there, it's an experience that you don't expect, and that was the case. People didn't expect there to be such enthusiasm at church. Have any of us ever seen so much enthusiasm at church? No, and so it was pretty remarkable.
hearing you talk about all these different volunteer experiences, I wonder, if there's someone that's listening to this that has never been on a mission trip, what do you want them to know about Maranatha mission trips?
So since I don't know what their hesitation is, I'll tell you what I hear most of the time is, I don't do construction. I can't do anything. I'm too old and I don't know what I would do. So my response to that is, we will find something for you to do. And you could go back to watch.maranatha.org and type in Sandra Godfrey, and she'll tell you what she did. So that's my mother-in-law.
I'll do you one better. I'll put it in the description so they can just click on the link.
They can click on the link, and Sandra will tell you what she did. But we do our best to find something for everyone to do, because I know it's important for people to feel like they are being needed. And part of it, honestly, is it's not just the work. I know that's important, and it's important to a lot of people. But in our mission statement, before construction of urgently needed buildings, it says build people. And I think that people don't realize how much fellowship and community they get by coming on a project, and how that fulfills a need that they didn't even know that they had. I see it over and over again. And so I would say, whatever your fear is, just give us a call. We'll talk to you about it. There's several people here in the office that have been, and we can pair you up with somebody that can help you, kind of navigate what you want to do. Well,
just know, if you're going off the old stereotype that you have to rough it to go on a mission trip, you don't have to. It's good food, it's safe, and the one thing is that people don't maybe realize is, with Maranatha, when you go on a trip, as soon as you are picked up at the airport, wherever you're going to and serving, that's it. You don't have to worry about anything else, because Maranatha is going to take you everywhere. Everything is going to be provided for you, food, the accommodations, whatever you need to do. You might want some spending money, if you want to get a souvenir or something, but other than that, Maranatha is going to take care of you from start to finish.
And that's exactly what I tell people. I said, just bring a little spending money. We got the rest. And I think really, truly, people feel cared for.
Well, it's a experience that you've helped to craft over the years. How many years have you been working for Maranatha? This is March 2024 when we're recording this.
So I started in January of '89. So I started over 35 years ago. So I've had a little bit of time off here and there for having children, but I never really strayed very far.
Considering all that experience, all those years, what does Maranatha mean to you?
It means, as much as I love seeing the people receive the buildings and see the buildings in use, to me there is nothing more important than the volunteers that come being changed as a result of their experience, and the people that we are serving also being changed. To me, that is, I am a people person in general, and that to me is so incredible. And lives being changed for eternity. That's really what it's all about. And I'm so grateful that that's a focus of Maranatha. It's really not just about doing, because we don't get to heaven by our works, we've been told that. So having that community and the relationship with others and God, it's really, it's powerful.
Seems like a good place to end. Karen, thank you for all you've done for Maranatha over the years, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.